we will begin. Welcome to the Jewish Study Center. I'm Jerry Garfinkel. I am the treasurer of the Jewish Study Center. And as such, I always tell you that our classes are free. Our instructors are knowledgeable and interesting. But we do have expenses, such as paying for the Zoom. So we encourage, but don't require, donations. If you want to donate, you can go to our website, www.jewishstudycenter.org, and you click on donate. And then when you donate, you can click on PayPal to pay from your PayPal account, or credit card, or check. If you click on check, it'll give you the address on where to send your check. Okay, that's my treasurer duties. And I'm also the technical person here. So I want to say something about technical points. As you probably notice, this is being recorded. And we'll cut off the recording that began before I started speaking. And after the class is over, the rest of the recording will be uploaded basically to YouTube, and I'll send an email to all the registered students on where the recording is. Now, I also have put on the comments, not the comments, I'm sorry, the what do you call it? Where it shows you what we're all saying. I'm sorry, I forget the words. What?
Transcript.
Okay. And everybody is going to be muted, but we do want your comments and we do want your questions. So put your comments and questions in the chat box, address them to everybody. Sometimes someone will comment on your comment or even answer your question, etc. After the sort of official presentation is over, we'll have a Q&A session. And Mindy, or maybe I, will be looking through the comments and ask the questions that you bring up. Okay, so now I usually introduce Mindy Reiser, who was our vice president, and then she introduces the actual speaker, which I'll do this time also, but it'll be a little bit different, because Mindy is going to actually be on and interview our presenter. So it'll be a new way for us to do our presentations. So Mindy, you can take over right now, and I will go out. You are muted, Mindy.
All right, I am unmuted now. All right, welcome, folks, from the far corners of the United States and Canada and Mexico, and I'm sure other parts of the world are coming in now. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce Reuven Schlenker, who I have known for many years, and I thought that he would be a wonderful person to share with us the world that he knows in a way most of us do not, which is the world of the Sofer. So let me read briefly Reuven's bio, which he sent me. And this is how he describes himself. First, let me say he is really distinguished in this extraordinary craft. And you will see, if you've looked carefully at the presentation that we sent in advance, some examples of his work. Okay, so he informs his work through his education and experience in the United States, Europe, and Israel. He was born in 1950 in Los Angeles, where he lived with his grandparents until 1959, when his father's military career took him to West Germany. And Reuven remained in Europe until 1979, spending summers in Yiddish-speaking yeshivot in Israel. So he brings a rather special immersion in these worlds to his work. He then returned to the US in 1979, and he began learning under some distinguished teachers, Chacham Rabbi Avraham Shamsian, if I'm pronouncing it right, from Isfahan, with whom he studied until 1984. He then began learning at the Vaad Mishmeret Stam in Brooklyn. He'll explain more what this important organization is. And he studied there under Harav Rabbi Aryeh Schechter. In terms of his secular education, Reuven attended Pepperdine College in LA, Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich, the University of Maryland at College Park, and George Washington University in Washington. He is married with 2 sons. One serves in the IDF on the northern border, and the other learning at Kibbutz Sedeh Eliyahu in Shomron, Israel. Okay, now that we've heard a little bit about Reuven's background, let's now talk about his craft and his extraordinary immersion in the world of the Sofer. So let's begin, Reuven, with your giving us some sense of the history of this artistry and this craft. When did it begin, and what were the teachings about how one would become a Sofer and what one would do in this craft?
You're muted, Reuven.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good, because it automatically, I was muted there. Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Jerry and Mindy for inviting me on. Okay. To answer your first question of when did Sofer or scribal arts begin, it began with Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu was the first scribe. He was the one that wrote the Torah, and that was the first scribal work. The development of scribal arts, however, changed dramatically throughout the years. There was a story that I read to Mindy and Jerry earlier last week about Rabbi Meir meeting Rabbi Yishmael. This is about the 1st century. And Rabbi Meir asked him, he said, "What is your job?" And he said, "I'm a lavlog," which is the Greek word for a sofer. So at that time, they were not called sofers. A sofer was a person that worked in the court of the king as a chronologist and also as an accountant. And that was their function. Writing holy articles only became manifest and particular in the 1st century when the writing of the scrolls became important. We see examples of that, of the scriptorium in the Dead Sea at Qumran. They devoted themselves completely to writing only their religious documents. Before that, the scribe, though, he had multiple functions. By our time, though, as we developed, the scribe became particularly only to religious articles, and they were called a sofer stam. Stam stands for Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzot. Those are the 3 most holy articles in the world of scribal arts. Of course, there's much other things that also are incidental to it, but these are the major things. During this period, from I would say the 1st century onward, and you can find examples of it in the Talmud, the Masechta Menachos. At the very end, there's a book called Masechta Sofer, the book of scribes, and it goes in and it lays down the rules, the particular rules that are important for writing a Sefer Torah. And there's so it goes back to at least the 1st century, perhaps even prior to the 1st century, that they're already scribing the rules of who was going to write a Sefer Torah, how it was to be written, and what was correct about it, and to make it a pure Sefer Torah. You could see examples of that in the works of Qumran. Obviously, they had learned this because the scribes that wrote the Dead Sea Scroll followed it almost very closely. So it was already popular by this time, and that was just for the writing of religious articles, religious works. That involved tefillin and mezuzot.
Let me stop you. Not everybody here may know what mezuzot and tefillin are. Many people will, but some may not. Could you please explain that?
Okay, tefillin are the black boxes that we wear when we pray. You see these? This is for the head, and this is for this one I showed earlier to Mindy and Jerry. This is from Galicia. It's for the arm. It's very large. And this is the one for the head. This contains 4 different parts. You can see them inside there from the Torah, which we were commanded by Moses. It goes back that far. He even describes how that's supposed to be made to wear when you are praying.
And what do they say? What do these parshot say?
They're different statements from the Torah. Vayidabad and the Moshe. One is about sacrificing for Passover. The most important one, it has the Shema in there, both parshas of the Shema. That's that. The other ones deal with actually leaving Mitzrayim, which was the most important miracle that brought the Jewish people together at that time. And so we'd like to reflect upon it. We mention it 3 times a day when you pray. Shachris, Mincha, Marav. We always mention leaving Israel and the splitting of the Red Sea and God's revelation. That's the apex of Jewish history right there. And those are mentioned in the Tefillin. Mezuzot, it contains the Shema. Here is a small mezuzot. You can see it. I've got it there, which I wrote years ago when I could write small. And those you put on the doorways of your houses, and excluding the bathroom doorway. But those are the ones, or the hall closet. Those are that you go in and out of, are the ones that you put it on. And these are Torah commandments. These are not made up by the rabbis. These are right out of the book, the big book. Okay, an example of the parshas that go in the Tefillin. Going back to the Tefillin, here is one from Lithuania. It's about 200 years old. It is the Shema.
Hold it up a little higher. Okay.
Can you see that? Everybody can see that? Beautiful handwriting. It's probably over 200 years old, but it's no longer valid. I keep it as an example. Really good writing. How you should really write.
Why no longer valid?
Because the earlier parshas that I also have, the ink went red, and so it makes all of them. Just because one was bad, all the rest are bad. This because in the law of writing tefillin, there's the major law. It's called Hiseder. It has to be written in order as it appears first in the Torah, and then when you're writing it out, you have to write it out in exactly the same order as it appears in the Torah. If you make a mistake and you realize that you made a mistake way before, you either have to erase everything all the way back and fix the mistake, or else it's no longer valid. In this case, it wasn't there was a mistake. It was that if the ink goes red, it's no longer valid. It's what they call puzzle. It's no good. And so, unfortunately, with these, the ink had gone puzzle. And so that made everything else bad.
All right. This is an intricate and fascinating world. So tell us then how you learned this tradition with its regulations and its codes of conduct and what is okay and what is not. Give us your own personal history as you entered this world.
It was not my intention to become a sofer. I didn't sit back and think like, I want to be a sofer. It was accidental, and but when the opportunity came, I was very happy that I had it. And it was my rabbi of blessed memory that introduced me to Rabbi Shamsian, who had just fled from Khomeini. It was 1979, and come to the United States. And he was a known scribe, and the rabbi had admired my handwriting previously, my Hebrew handwriting, and advised it to Rabbi Shamsian, who was looking for students primarily to work for him, which I did. And he taught me how to write correctly, both in the Sephardic Nusach tradition and also in the Ashkenazi. They're 2 different traditions, very distinct from one another. And I worked for him for 3 years and learned from him for 3 years. He did not teach me the laws, halacha, which is later on I learned at the Vad Mishmeret Stam. He did teach me how to write, and since I was not mikobel, it's like the same thing. When you become a rabbi, you get smicha. And when you're a sofer, you become mikabel. The word Kabbalah comes from that. You're mikabel, you received the training, the learning. And so he had me working on Megillot, which are not, the Megillah that you read for Purim doesn't have God's name in it. So it's okay. You can go through and write it any way you want. And writing marriage contracts, which don't have God's name in it. They're just straight out business contracts. And so there was no problem making a mistake in those. You could always go back and erase it. So he had me writing those, wedding invitations, things like that. I was doing that, but I was learning how to write. And he also instructed me, contrary, which I learned later on, in aspects of Kabbalistic ideas that go there, that are part of the Sofer world and the Sofer writings. And he taught me a lot of that deals with writing and Kabbalistic thought. That was his. And then when he moved to Los Angeles, and I could no longer learn from him, I started going to the Vad Mishmer Stam. That's an organization that was set up back in I believe in the early 70s by Harav Hagaon Shmuel Halevi Vosner, and in Israel for the protection of scribal arts, and which means mishmer, to protect, to keep it correct, and make certain that you follow the halakhat, the laws dealing with safut, with scribal arts. And I started going there, which is very strict, and they're still the number one organization for teaching and also for controlling the scribal world. For an example, what I mean by controlling, we've had a problem long time ago, not long time, it's a continuing problem, is people will go into synagogues and they will steal the Sefer Torahs. And then they will take them and sell them out west someplace, or maybe in Canada, or maybe in Australia, who knows, maybe in Russia, but they'll sell them. And these are stolen properties. I spent the whole summer, one whole summer, just scanning it with this computer scanner. So we could register the Sefer Torahs. That's part of the VODs, that's part of the organization of the VOD too. So that was what I was learning, and I learned from them. I learned the halakot, which are myriads of halakot. This is one of the books here, for example. I showed it to Mindy and Jerry earlier. It's called Lakuti Sefri Stam. This is the collection of all the laws dealing with Sofers and their works. It's a very thick book, a lot of good pictures. And so on. Shows you how to really write a Megillah and so on, and how the script is supposed to look like, and what you're supposed to do, and how you go about writing.
And when was this published, this compilation?
When this was done, this is recent, because almost everybody in here have been writing about the laws of Safut for years and years and years. I have a book called Book Shoma, and it's a standard book, and it must have been written in the 16th century. It was written by a student of the Maharal. You're familiar with the Maharal of Prague. He was one that invented the golem. Well, he was also a great rabbi outside of that. And he was one of the students, and he's talking about the laws of writing a Sefer Torah at that time. And then, of course, if you go in the Shulchan Aruch, which is written by Yosef Karo in the 16th century, then you get the laws of writing a Sefer Torah. The Rambam has it too, Ilkot Sefer Torah, laws of writing Sefer Torah, in his Yad Chazacha, the Mishnah Torah, from the Rambam, from Maimonides. So the writing and compilation of this has been going on since the early, I would say, since the time of the beginnings of the Talmud in the 1st century to now, and just been added on, people making the comments. When Joseph Cairo, he was writing for the Sephardim, and Moshe Isserlis, the Mapo from Krakow, he was the one who added his commentary on how the Ashkenazim do it, and then the Hafez Haim in the Mishnah Berurah in the last century also added his commentary. Everybody has a commentary. They're all Jewish, and everybody's got something to say, and they'll write it down and they'll get it published.
So for those who want to follow up, there is an English version of the book that you just showed us.
This is the one that Mindy's speaking about right now, Inside Stam. And it's written by Rabbi Reuven Mendelevitz. And it's a recent publication, 2012, and it's an excellent book.
Okay, so maybe,
Order it, you know, that, oddly enough, there's a lot of vanity works. This one here was a compilation of, it's called Bar Mitzvahs and Tefillin Secrets. And it was written by my rabbi and a Satmar rabbi. And what's good about it, he gives all these interesting stories, but he also gives, Aria took all these great photographs, how to put on tefillin, how different Hasidim wear their tefillin, how they bind it. Well, like an example here. Everybody has something different to wear, the way they strap it on. So there's no one way of doing anything when it comes to that. There's many different ways, but those are books that you can find online. Just like this book by Rabbi Shire. This is also orderable online. And those are, I think, the only books that I know of in English. Reuven Leaf wrote a book called Hebrew Calligraphy, which is a very good book too. It's big, folio sized, and I'm trying to think of any others that I do, but most of my are all in Hebrew. So since you're writing in Hebrew, you better speak it and how to write it.
okay, we have a question again about the pipeline of Sofrim. Somebody asks, is there a shortage of Sofrim? And are younger people pursuing work of this sort? And also the whole issue of women as Sofrim.
Okay, first of all, I think there's enough of us on the market that we're not going to make a living out of it. I'll tell you that. Many of us, especially in the Hasidic community, a lot of people become soifers. And not even in the Hasidic community, just in the standard Orthodox world, there is a number of people that become soifers, and it's not a job that you consider very steady and pays a lot. I mean, the only work that I ever get is when the rabbi finds a mistake in a Sefer Torah and asks me to come over to fix it, or when somebody gets sick and they want me to check his mezuzah. When you write a mezuzah, people expect to have it very cheap, but it takes a long time, a lot of work to write a mezuzah. So writing mezuzahs for a living it's sort of a zero-sum gain occupation. And checking tefillin, we generally you should, according to halakha, to Jewish law, you're required to get your tefillin checked every 7.5 years. But the reality is, unless you're taking a shower with them on, or you're walking around outside with them on, you really don't need them. Or you spill them or spill something on them, you're not going to need to get them checked inside that much. But the halakha is, and so people do want to have their tefillin checked, especially if they get sick. There's no mistakes in them.
What are they checking it for?
They're checking it for any kinds of mistakes that maybe the previous sofer. An example of that was most synagogues have what they call a genitha. That's where people deposit holy articles that are no longer usable. And a lot of people, they just take their grandparents tefillin and dump them on the shul, because they're not going to wear them anymore. They're not religious anymore, but they're superstitious about throwing them away, and or their prayer books and so on and so forth. At my synagogue in Washington, D.C. that I was going to at one time, the Rabbi Reuven Schlenker, Rabbi Hillel Klavan, asked me to go through and check the stuff in the Geniza if there's anything that was reusable or still valid, and I did. And in checking much of the tefillin, I found that some of the boxes were not made from leather. These are supposed to be made from leather. They were made from plastic. And inside the plastic boxes often was not parshiot of like this, but Chinese newspapers. And people were thinking that these were legitimate, that was another reason the Vad Mishmeret stand was set up, because a lot of the soifers out there were charlatans. And they were selling non-religious stuff as religious stuff to believing Jews who thought they were getting the real thing. A lot of times it wasn't necessarily because of they're outright charlatans, because I remember many years ago when I was in yeshiva in Israel, the Yemenite kids would go and they would buy klafin like this to buy a stuff to write mezuzahs on it, and they would write mezuzahs very quickly, and then they would show it to my rabbi, Rabbi Akiva Kavi, I'll show them, And he would look at me and say, oh, kosher, good. And then they would sell them for cigarette money. Later on, I checked some of these when I was knowledgeable and what I was supposed to be doing, and they were all invalid completely. They were horribly written. But my rabbi, he didn't know anything about the laws, scribal arts, and the students didn't either. They just know that you write it, you get money for it, and that was how it went. Now we're going through, and the Bible set up to check this and to find out whether these are still valid or whether they're pieces of trash, unfortunately. And I remember many times when I'd be checking somebody's tefillin, the Vod Mishmer Sam would have massive tefillin checks. All the people would bring in their tefillin to get them checked. And sometimes you could see automatically these things were going to be puzzle. And you'd open them up and you say, look, these are no good. And then they would get angry with me and threaten me because these are my grandfather's. How could you say that? Your grandfather was using lousy tefillin. They'd almost beat you up for that. So it became at times precarious. But that was why the VOD was set up, was to make certain that what was being referred as religious articles, everything from a Sefer Torah to a mezuzah, to tefillin, was flat kosher, mahadran at the highest quality. Now, the question of the women can write holy articles. The area of stam in the world of orthodoxy has been limited, when I started out, only to the males. Stam only refers to Sefer Torahs, tefillin, and mezuzot. And it also was restricted, according to this book, to people that write with the right hand.
All Yaakov, that said. Okay.
That was the book that I was educated through. Then I was found out later on, according to the Sephardic traditions, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, alav shalom, he said, no, you can write with your left hand too. And this is after I had actually taught people to write with their right hand who were lefties. But they had learned that because that was how I was brought up. But then I found out later on, write with left hand. Whether women are permitted to write this or not depends actually on your congregation. My mother-in-law, Aliyah Shalom, was her temple scribe, and she was the one that did the Sofer work. She learned it because she was a Hebrew scholar, and she had access to everything on how to write and so forth. And I was fortunate enough that after she passed away, I inherited her tools. But she was the scribe for, I think it was Stanley Dreyfus. And he was the son-in-law of Leo Beck, or grandson-in-law of Leo Beck. And so it depends actually whether what congregation you go to, whether you're going to learn, whether your scribal arts will be particularly accepted or not. In the Orthodox world, of course, it's a completely male-dominated world. However, in the world of scribal arts, there's much more than just stam, Sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzot. There is the writing of manuscripts, megillot, ketuvot, often written by women. They're completely legitimate. And also of what I call shvitis. Shvitis are, this is a shviti. It's a Kabbalistic manuscript that you put up in front of you. It's called a shviti from the phrase, Shviti Hashem lenegdi tomed. May God be in front of me at all times. And usually you find them, up on the bima, on the altar, near the altar, or the rabbi is praying, and it's in front of him. And that's how people put them on. They're also called the mizrach, because people like to put them on the walls, the eastern walls of their house. And those are often written by females.
Okay, now you've alluded to the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi modes of writing. Can you tell us a little bit more and give us some examples about these very fine and important distinctions?
Okay, here is, let me find a picture. This would be, your alphabet or your gimel, you see, in the style of the Ashkenazim. This is called Ashura.
Called what?
Ashura.
Shura, okay.
And let's find that Sephardi. Well, here you can see, this is even better. This is the difference. You see the difference between the two Gimels?
Wait a second, pull it up a little higher, please, the book.
Can you see this is the difference? One has a square head and one has a rounded head.
A little bit more, well, maybe other people can see it better.
The one with the rounded head is Sephardic. The one with the square head is Ashkenazi. That shows you those are the fine differences. I learned both ways from my rabbi Shamsian Abba Shamsian. But when I went to the Vad and I told them I'd learned both ways, they were not pleased because they have said you have a tendency, therefore, to you be writing in Ashkenazi, and then suddenly you may just go and start using the style of the Sephardic script in the middle of a word or a sentence. They call this Ashkeduzi. And but since I'd already learned it, as they say, in the Evid, it was okay. That means de facto it was okay. Lahat kilo, if I had started out that way and I hadn't learned it, didn't learn it, that was not permitted. But I already had learned it, so it was too late. And so I'm educated in both styles.
What mode do you generally write in?
If I'm working on, let's say, a Kabbalistic manuscript, example like this, I usually use Sephardi. But I'm rocking a Sefer Torah, which is here's a sheet from which I'm working on right now. Actually, from the book of Bamidbar, I use Ashkenazi. So in my case, I have the option of doing either.
Okay, while you're handling,
Here's an example of a Kabbalistic manuscript I wrote in both, using both alphabet styles.
oh my God, explain the illustration there.
The illustrations are they are part of the for people familiar with Kabbalistic works. When I'm learning something, like in this case with the Eitz Chaim from the Arizal, Isaac Luria, written down by Chaim Vital, Rabbi Chaim Vital, and I take notes, and then when I get the notes up to a certain point, I give an example of my note taking. Here's one of my note taking on Sfiot, another note taking on different olamot. Here's another example of
But hold it up a little longer so people can really take a look.
these are all just examples of note taking. So I take notes so I can see it better with a visual, what he's talking about if I visualize it by writing it down. And so that's an example when I use it. And then I use basic, I generally, mostly it's Sephardic nusach, Sephardic style of writing.
Okay, somebody asks, and we talked about this earlier when we had an earlier meeting with you, about the material that you write on.
Okay, this is what I write on. It is called cloth in Hebrew, or parchment. It's parchment. And it comes from an animal. It says the halacha, it says Torah Hashem b'picho. The word of God has to be in your mouth. But the meaning in your mouth, it means it has to be something you can actually eat that's kosher. Okay, there's a lot of things out there that are kosher, but they don't make good writing material. The best kosher writing material, of course, comes from cattle, sheep, and goats. And in one point in history, back in the 15th century, and prior to that time, deer skin. But it doesn't have, the animal doesn't have to be sheket, it doesn't have to be killed in a kosher manner. It just has to be a kosher animal. So you could take any kind of animal that died treifa, torn, and still use its hide or use parts of it because it's still kosher. And so that was too, they would write on that. That was what all the Torah scrolls were written on that. We noticed that the Qumran, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of them, let's say, were written on copper actually, and some were written on papyrus. And so it was the halakha writing of what constitute the kosher writing didn't become predominant until I'd say about maybe about the third, fourth century, about that time when it became dominant that way.
Okay, one thing I know people will want to understand, the tools you use to do this writing and this illustration.
I use a quill, and I use special kosher ink to write with. And those are the two things that are important to write with. And I spend time dipping it, doing it back and forth like this, writing a Sefer Torah. It takes a long time, but you're intending. The reason for that is because they want to make that you word every word bikvuna with an intention that you're writing this word, because this is the word of God, and so you don't want to make mistakes. However, if you make a mistake with the Sefer Torah, no problem. You go back and erase it. You fix it. I've done it. I can hold up the cloth that I just showed you and show you the different smudges on there when I say, oh, I made a mistake, or the ink ran, or something like that. You can correct the Sefer Torah. It's not like tefillin and mezuzot. When you make a mistake, it's almost no good. This case, Sefer Torah is a public document, and it's used constantly. It's rolled constantly. So it's going to get some sort of abuse. Another thing is that a lot of people, when they're reading the Sefer Torah, they have this silver yad, this little hand thingy, and they drag it across the ink, and they pop the ink up because the ink is brittle. They don't know what they're doing. I know what they're doing. I mean, it's terrible what they're doing. I bring it up, but on the other hand, it's also money for me because I'm called in to fix it.
All right, explain this. Also, somebody asked earlier about the ink turning red. How does that happen?
Age. And also a lot of it is over time, the ink will turn red. Especially with the Sefer Torah, because it's actually out in the light quite a bit. But a lot of it is how the ink is made. The prescription for making the ink is actually described by Maimonides in his Mishnah Torah, his laws of writing the Sefer Torah. He gives a recipe for how they used to make ink. Over the time, the ink does different things have been used to make the ink. One of the examples is with the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, especially in Czechoslovakia, there were discovered warehouses full of Sefer Torahs that had been gathered by the Nazis, Yamach Shmam, during World War II and sent to Prague to be part of an exhibit of a vanished culture. And they were all just stored there. When the communists took over, they didn't do anything with them. They just let them sit in the warehouses. When the communists fell, these Sefer Torah, these Torah scrolls, were now available to different congregations, and the Czech government made them available to anybody that wanted it. And a number of them also came to Miami and also to Washington, D.C. And I was asked to check on some of these Sefer Torah scrolls were over 900 years old, maybe even 1,000 years old. One, you know that they're very old because the standard Sefer Torah is only 48 centimeters or smaller. These were 70 centimeters. They're very large. And they're not written on beef or sheep or goat skins. They're written only on deer skins. And they're called Italo-German in style because they predominate between Italy and southern Germany, where most of them came from, though later on many of them got other places too. They stopped writing them, I'd say, about the 1500s. And because even in the book Shomer, which is written at that time and printed certainly after that, he was talking about how they were already old and the writing was no longer valid. And at that time, when they were making the ink, they mixed it with rose water, and the rose water turned red over time. And so many of the almost exclusive to Sefer Torahs, I haven't seen any other. All the ink had turned red, which made them invalid. And I was asked to make them valid. I mean, I have to write the entire Sefer Torah using a script that has not been used for over 600 years. I did. but only for one parsha, and it was only for Rabbi Sid Schwartz out there in Rockville. And, and he was gracious enough to accept that. But it was the Sefer Torah was very, very old. And he the recipient of one of them. And but that was that's the history. There's been many changes in the world of scribal arts, and especially through the Vad Mishmer Stam, is the introduction of the computer into the world. The computers do affect everything. We scan them now. We use computers to register things. We use computers to check things. You can check a Sefer Torah by going through with the scanner, and not only you're scanning it, but you're also checking it for mistakes. And so we can know that the computers have revolutionized much of a world which is otherwise we still do just write with a quill. That's as far as modern as we can get. So some people, though, I learned to write with bamboo at the beginning with the Iranians taught me to write with bamboo sticks that I carved out. No, bamboo is very good too. Do we have any other? Where should I go on from here, Mindy?
Okay, well, there are a number of questions, and I think I will give Jerry the opportunity to pose some of them. But before he does that, say a little bit more about emerging developments in the world of the Sofer, in some of the imaging, in some of the calligraphy. What are you seeing from younger people who are engaging in this work?
It's just like me, that you get the same story from them that you get from me. We all come from the same educational machine, the VOD, and we think like the VOD. People make fun of us because they said we're very strict when it comes to the world of scribal arts. And what is the first thing they teach you at the VOD when you go in there? You go in, you say, not good. It's not good. It's puzzle. It's invalid because we are very strict. Now that's the best aspect of the Sofer. What does the Sofer do day by day? Well, if you're going to write and you're going to write God's name, the first thing you have to go to the mikvah. Now, for people that can't go to a mikvah, in the Masechta Shabbos in the Talmud, it says if you stand under running water for 10 minutes, that's the same thing. It's not the same thing as going to a really good old-fashioned mikvah that stinks, but nevertheless is a mikvah. You stand under the shower for 10 minutes, it's the same thing. So I do that because I'm not going to go running all over New York looking for a mikvah that's open at that time, and so on and so forth. And so you go to the mikvah, and then afterwards you sit down, and there are kavunot. Those are intentions that you say. A yehi ratzon, maybe God's will, that I write well, that I don't make mistakes, and so on and so forth. This is all done after you finish davening in the morning. And then you sit down, and the first thing you do if you're going to be writing the holy name is you write the word Amalek. And you write it out so you know that you can actually write it. And then when you're finished writing it, you erase it. And then you can start writing. And I just pick up where I left off and then start writing there. Whatever it is, whether it's a mezuzah or whether I don't write tefillin. Tefillin, to write really good tefillin, you have to write very small, and I do not have that ability. So I check tefillin, I repair tefillin, but I don't write tefillin. And I don't write small mezuzot anymore. I write larger mezuzot. This is my size now, which is large. As you can see, it comes in a very large container on the door. Small containers, usually when you look inside the mezuzah, unless it's written by a Yemeniti, a Syrian, or a German, it's probably going to be no good. They were people that were able to write, they trained us to write very, very small and very, very accurate with no mistakes. It's beautiful handwriting. And that's you used to always tell the German Jews, because their batim for their tefillin were much smaller than this, because their writing was much smaller. Their batim, the smaller batim, head things that you put on, like right up here, the smaller they are, the more kosher they are. Because they're supposed to be, it says totafos beneako, it says up front between your eyes. And these, I mean, I want to say it, is large. Okay. Some of the tools that we also use, I showed Mindy, it's called gidin. This is from the sciatic nerve. We use it to sew the separatoras together. We use it to sew up the mezuzahs together. I mean, the batim on your tefillin together. It comes from the sciatic nerve in honor of Yaakov Avinu, our father Jacob, who wrestled with the angel who made him paralyzed by touching his sciatic nerve and limping all the. And if you ever had sciatica, as I have, you'll understand exactly how painful they can be, and how miserable it is. And so every time I look at one of these, I think, oh man, boy, that really hurts. You can't even walk. Okay. You have another question?
Yeah, again, going back to the Va'ad, do they issue pronouncements from time to time to people in the Sofer circle? Are they kind of the court of last resort? If people have problems, they ask them for advice. And who are they exactly?
They're central, and they're organized in Brooklyn. I go through my own Rabbi Reuven Schlenker, who was the scribal art director at the VOD, so he's my immediate emissary. He calls me up and says, "Oh, we need you for a tefillin check in Brooklyn." I go over there and spend the afternoon checking people's tefillin, and or they would call Shmuel Harvest was another one, and he would be the one that organized the Max Deckelbaum, who owns Sholom's Kosher Market in Washington, D.C., or Silver Spring or Kent Mill, wherever it is now. He would be the person. He moved to Florida, I believe. I don't know if he's still alive even. But his sons, they would organize, because he was friends with these people, he would organize the tefillin check in Washington, D.C. and Rockville areas. And the bar would come down and I would join them because I was there, Sofer, in Washington, D.C. And that was how it was. It's a very loose organization. It's not a structured organization like a company or anything like that. It's just a bunch of people that know each other, studied there, and and we know that we're all part of this one group. That's it.
And I asked you before, but let me ask you again, since we have in our participants here people from across the country. So are there other equivalents of Va'ad on the West Coast, in the middle?
I have no idea. My contact with the VOD is just my friends in Brooklyn, and they call me up. But you can go online. I'm certain they'll have access to the VOD Mishmer Stam online, and they will put you in contact with whoever you need.
Okay, folks.
They will come out. They will come to you. If there's nobody there, they will come to you and help you out.
Okay, so our friends here from across the country, you heard that. Let me turn to Jerry, who can pose some of the questions that have emerged in the chat, and some of them are quite technical. Jerry?
Okay, all right, I'll do that. Let me see if I can get myself into the spotlight here. Doris, who's an expert on calligraphy, asked what goes into the ink? You're saying
Okay, this is
etc.
I had.
You know what it's made of?
Okay. This is going to be an interesting little story here. There were two Soferim that worked on Essex Street, the AY Soferim, Aaron and Yosef. They're no longer there. Everybody's gone from them. But I went to Aaron Yosef and I said, I want this is before when I was still with Rabbi Shamsi, and I wanted to make my own ink. And I went to them and I said, do you have a recipe how to make it? So they gave me a recipe how to make it. And I took the recipe when I got to Washington, D.C., and I went to Heckinger's. And I said, look, I need these materials. Can you give them to me? And I looked at it and says, we'll have to call you. I said, we don't have it in stock. And so at that same time, a friend of mine, I think many maybe remember him, Charles Goolsby, was applying for a job at the State Department. And at that time, they used people from the FBI around to ask questions for a character check on these people. And I put my name down as one of the people to be checked. So I wasn't surprised when at work, when somebody said, oh, by the way, somebody from the FBI wants to meet you downstairs. I said, I want to tell you that Charles is a wonderful American. He's a great person. He's worked for the State Department. He's highly educated. We're not here to talk to Charles. We're here to talk to you. did you give this list to Heckinger's? And I said, yes. And he said, we have a file on you.
Oh,
And I said, oh. He says, you were with the JDL. And I said, well, yes, I had been. And he said, you know, the JDL is a terrorist organization. What do you want these? Because the materials you put down were also materials for making explosives. I had no idea. I was very informed that I was on the FBI's wanted list still. And, and I obviously wasn't going to be able to make my own ink. But it informed me of that. So later on in the computer world, I went online when they had the freedom of information. I had to start looking up any people, not just me, but friends of mine and also family members. And I found that, you know, a number of my family members had been wanted, or at least they've been noted by the FBI, mostly because they had been fellow travelers of the Communist Party back in the 40s and the 50s, and so on and so forth, including my mother. And I was delighted that this was out there. Now it's all gone, but that was I also found out that all my friends that had been friends in the JDL days, they were also on the same list. So that was my experience in trying to make my own ink. As for the recipe, I recommend you, if you want to find out, you can go to the Rambam. You can look in Hilchot, the Sefer Torah, the laws of making a Sefer Torah. He gives the recipe there, and the Mishnah Torah, and then you can go to Heckinger's and see, try your luck, or whatever.
Heckinger's still there. I think.
What, Heckinger's?
Is
I don't know
Heckinger's
who's
still
there.
around? Not that I know of, but maybe they are.
I don't know. That was
I
right.
don't know if the Jewish Defense League is even still around.
Oh no. We had disbanded years before.
You know, one question I got from the chat wasn't asked in this way, but you talked about there's a Sephardic and an Ashkenazi way of writing. Is
Yeah.
there a Mizrahi way also, or is that?
I see. I should say it. The Mizrahi is actually what we call Sephardi, but it's not. It's actually Mizrahi. Mizrahi is over. It's probably the truest way of writing. It would be in the form of the Mizrahiot, how they write. I mean, the most authentic Judaism comes from what we call Babylon. That would be Iraq, Syria, Iran, Kurdistan, Turkey, and anywhere east of the Jordan River, where we were taken away, because that was where Judaism was really preserved. And so the most authentic Jewish sort of way of life would come from the Mizrahiot.
You know, I've been told that the most authentic way of speaking Hebrew is the Yemenite way. Is there a Yemenite? Is that Yemenite also part of the Mizrahi, or
No, the Yemenites are a culture unto themselves. They're like the Ethiopian, the Falasha, or the Beth Israel. They have they're Jewish, and they're representative Jewish, but they represent a world completely that had been cut off for so many years. But not completely cut off. It's interesting. Yosef Kefa, who was the head rabbi of the Yemeni community in Israel for many, many years, brilliant scholar. He worked with Adin Steinsaltz in translating the Midrash Agor, which was a Yemeni work, and not translate, but putting the Judeo-Arabic into Hebrew. But the Hebrew University publication, they worked on it for years. He was the person that oversaw the whole thing. It's a great work on Maimonides' exegesis, because he was completely a follower of Maimonides. How it happened that the Yemenites became great Kabbalists at the same time they are strict Maimonides Aristotelian philosopher types was because Yemen was the port. Because in those days it was very dangerous to take the Silk Route across what I would say right now, Parthia, to India, to go to India or Iran, to Barcelona, places like that, because of the robbers at the time. So people would take the boat and go all the way around Arabia and come up to the Gulf of Hamas, the Strait of Hamas into Iran. So the people that came down from Alexandria, places like that along on the Red Sea, they brought the books of the Rambam But when they had to stop in Aden, in Yemen, and when they did, the Yemenites always said, bring books. And so they got all these books from the Rambam. But when they came from the other direction, coming down from Iran, they were the mystical books that were influenced by the Platonic thought, not Aristotelian, but Platonic thought. Of course, they had to stop in Aden again to get their water and their provisions, and they brought them those books. So it made the Yemenites experts in both fields. That was the one, so they excelled in that area completely. But other than that, they were mostly cut off from landmass because of the Great Desert area between that. Only 2 boats, just like those on the Horn of Africa, Elephantine, and so forth, where they have great collections of Aramaic writings and printings from that time. Don't forget the entire area on the west coast of the east coast of Africa and all the way down the coast of Arabia was once a great shipping area and a place of great Jewish enterprise and so forth.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of our time. And a pragmatic question or two. Somebody writes about replacing unkosher to fill in with a kosher text. And I guess, how would one do that? How would one find somebody to provide that service?
What, to give them to fill in?
Yeah, to scrutinize what's written and to see if it's kosher, and if not, to replace it.
Okay, my advice is if you can't contact the Vad Mishmat Stam, I would advise going to the Chabad. Chabad is very, very, very good about tefillin. They provide inexpensive tefillin of the highest quality. And that's part of the shita, the theory of the Hasidic movement is that everybody should be wearing tefillin. And so they really do stress it. And they would be delighted if you were interested in doing it to come to you, or at least arrange for them to get a pair of tefillin.
And of course, they're all around the country, folks. So you scattered across this nation, keep that.
Chabad's like Coca-Cola. They're everywhere.
Around the world.
Around the world. You can find him. My wife, when she has to go to Russia, she used to work for the State Department, and she would go to Russia, some obscure village out there in the middle of Siberia. Chabad. They're there.
Reuven, I may have missed it. There was a question. I don't know if you spoke about Megillas. I mean, a month from now is going to be Purim. Someone was saying that they read that a Megillah only has to be 55% correct. I mean, what's the rule for Megillah? Book of Esther?
The Megillah, it should be 100% correct, but I mean, mistakes are made because you're not so restricted as you are with writing a Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzot. And people write them rather quickly, I know, because I used to write Megillahs before I became Stam. That was what I wrote, was Megillah. And I wasn't so machmir, as we say, strict on myself. And now I go back and I find like, oh man, I made a lot of mistakes. I had to correct them and things like that. But the thing about a Megillah is that you're reading it, and so you have it open in front of it. You'll see the mistake. You just take a pencil, mark it, and go back and you can correct. There's no problem. If it's only 50% correct, well, then you have 50% work to do.
Okay.
But I mean, I mentioned the story to you about I was asked to come to the Library of Congress because of the preservation department. They had in their special collection a very large Megillah with Armageddon-sized print. I mean, it was large, and they wanted to know why. And the answer, of course, is obvious because the halakha is when you go to hear the Megillah being read, you have to read it at the same time. You are required, that's a law, to read the Megillah while it's being read to you and hearing it. And in small communities where they only had one Megillah, it was a large one, so everybody could stand around the guy reading it and read it themselves too. And that was how things were. And so you find these anomalies in Judaism, they're all explainable.
Okay, we are informed by Allison, if I have this right, that there is a Chabad in Iceland. Perhaps she encountered them when she was there. Reuven, this has been fascinating, and I am sure that you will find people trying to find you with more questions.
Okay, if you want to turn it over to the question part, I'll do that.
Okay, Jerry, if you want to say any concluding words.
Well, as I said earlier, I will send an email out when the recording is posted. In the email, I'll also put other information. I think I'd like to get from Reuven these English language books. I'll just list them. Actually, one of them is in the chat. Someone is familiar and wrote it, but I'll try to put into the email in more information like the English language books if you want to look at them.
That'd be very good, right?
And whatever else you think would be useful, Reuven, we can put into that email.
It helps if you can read Hebrew, because almost all the script is in Hebrew, and I would recommend, if you really want to become familiar with the laws of writing, and you can find it in the Mishnah Berurah, which is a commentary by the Chafetz Chaim on Orach Chaim of the Shulchan Aruch by Joseph Cairo and Moshe Isserles. And that's your standard thing to start with. I refer back to that all the time, because if you go, all the other books I have become repetitive, and they say the same thing over and over again. And I've already learned that, So that would be the ones I would recommend.
Not all the books.
And this book here would be one of the better ones to introduce you to.
A complete buyer's guide. Well, that's rather
Complete buyer's guide.
Okay, I will thank you, Reuven, and also Mindy, and also the nice questions we had from the audience. We don't have a class next week, but we do have a class 2 weeks from today, and that will be a class about small town Jewish life, which I'm interested in learning about, because I come from a small town. I come from a big metropolitan area of 400 people in the Catskills. So,
Oh,
did
did you ever meet Raji Dangerfield?
well, I didn't
Jackie
know,
Mason?
but we did have we had one or two big names. We often had the big names from Yiddish theater, like Molly Picon and
Molly Picon, sure, yeah. Moy Schwartz.
we didn't have Moshe Ership. We had his,
Joyce,
and it was interesting. Anyway, so I expect to see many of you in 2 weeks. And by the way, make one comment about what you said about women writing the Torah. I'm a member of Fabrengen Chavara, and we bought a Torah about 30 years or 25 years ago. And the man who sold it, from the bookstore, the rabbi who,
Menachem Yolist.
yeah, he claimed that the Sofer Torah we bought was written by a woman. That probably not true, but I mean, we know he tells stories, but we did get it checked out. But whether it was written by a woman or not, it checked out. It was kosher.
I'm friends with the family. With the Yolist family. I know people.
Can't thank you enough. And you've shared so much. And for anyone who wants to plumb the depths, you now have some guidelines and some resources. And maybe some of you will want to pursue this. People create new careers for themselves. And now you have some instructions of how to begin.
My advice was the same thing that my rabbi told me when I finally ended my yeshiva career. He says, well, Reuven, don't quit your day job.
Right. You don't make money out of that.
I said, I plan to become a librarian. And they said, that's Yiddish club.
All right, Laila Tov, everyone. Leil Menucha, restful evening, and you have much to ponder.
And we'll see you all in 2 weeks. And thank you again, Reuven.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Okay.
Glad to tell you.